Wizards of the Coast is 2 for 2 on ruining formats with Universes Beyond Mythics. Badgermole Cub has hit the scene not only as an expensive card, but one that's had impact in all Magic the Gathering formats. And there's been a lot of talk about bans of this card and its impact in older formats like Modern and Legacy, but what I want to do in today's video is talk about its impact. Give you a full picture on where it lands in terms of maybe broken in Standard, but actually kind of interesting in Pioneer or really powerful in Modern and Legacy. But before we hop into the video at large, let me know in the comment section down below, how do you feel about Badgermole Cub? What is your experience, small or wide, of the card? And do you think it's worth the hype? Maybe your opinion changes as this video goes on, but I'm hoping you get to understand the real power of this little 2/2 Badgermole. This card is mega busted, the return of the Universes Beyond Mythic to ruin all of Magic the Gathering. Now, to be fair, VV, being that previous title owner, was primarily only the Standard format. VV doesn't really see play past that, otherwise in Commander. Now, Badgermole Cub is actually having a widespread effect, having a change being done in all formats, honestly, and that's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, is it necessarily busted and broken in those formats? Not necessarily. It does actually lead to the creation of net new archetypes, and it actually does buff existing ones as well. So a lot of people are actually genuinely excited for a card like this. But when it comes to the Standard environment specifically, and maybe some of the other formats, a lot of people are frustrated by its power. And as mentioned in the intro, we're going to be kind of expanding on that. We're going to be going through all of the formats that I see relevant where Badgermole Cub is having said effect, why it's having that effect, and how actually each and every single point of the Badgermole Cub and its abilities are actually being used in different ways in each format. It really goes to highlight the difference in requirements, the floor required for a card to be good in those formats, and how it's then able to be used in said format to be fully extrapolated, fully used, squeezed for all of its juices, if you will. Badgermole Cub, in this little rant here, can we talk about the state of Standard? They're talking about how, they played Challenge Mono Red and how they played against a combo deck using Badgermole Cub, and how many decks exist with Badgermole Cub right now that are super fast, super aggressive, and a lot of people are expressing concern with the power of Badgermole Cub. I actually recently did a video last week on the power of Simic Aggro, and the viability of this card across formats, especially in Standard right now, has led to the meteoric rise, I would say, of this card. Now, it really previewed super strong, a card that was super chase, and now being about $77-80 in Canada right now. If I go to face-to-face games, Toronto, a little bit overpriced in their prices, I do want to mention, but still 120 freaking Canadian dollars for a singular copy of this card. And I opened a ton of product that was gifted to me by Wizards of the Coast as an MTG ambassador. I opened a bunch of product, only had one of them in there. Absolutely wild. The availability of this card is just to the ground, like not available whatsoever, and it is absolutely shooting up in terms of play. And a lot of discussions are being had as to, do you buy this Cub? Is it going to be the $400 tax on all of these decks that you're trying to play in the various formats? Is it even worth getting into, especially when it comes to Standard? We have Magic the Gathering Worlds coming up especially, and so Badgermole Cub is going to be seeing a lot of play there, but it's also led to a lot of counterplay. Unlike VV, where it was the de facto best thing to do, I would actually argue Standard does have counterplay. As someone who's playing Simic Aggro in Standard right now, just to kind of break the limits of it, I have played multiple games where I've been beaten to the ground by other opposing strategies that are actively ready for me. And so I believe, especially in Standard, there is counterplay, but that doesn't mean the mole doesn't have a place in Standard. So let's talk about the first format in this, where Standard is actually chock full of aggressive strategies and combo strategies. We have Mono Red Aggro, Is It Prowess, a 4-color Reanimator being a combo style strategy, Bant Airbending combo, and Simic Aggro. Again, a lot of aggressive strategies at the top of the Standard metagame. But with that, we still have some of the top decks being Dimir midrange and Jeskai Control. So these decks look to be a wall for the combo strategies and the aggressive strategies to even make their way up to the top. And it's actually, I would say, a relatively self-correcting metagame. It's going to take some time. We're going to need some competitive data, especially from Magic Worlds, to really see where Standard really kind of ends up. But we may actually end up seeing a change from Standard. But let's talk about Badgermole specifically. Now, as I mentioned, Badgermole Cub gets used in a slightly different way across every single format. Yes, all parts of it are generally being used in said formats, but the different formats actually exploit a different part of it. Notably with standard, I would argue the part that's getting abused is that second line. Badgermole being a 2-mana 2/2 Badgermole, generally a bear here. When this creature enters Earthband 1, the specifics of Earthband don't necessarily matter for the sake of the second ability here, which says whenever you tap a creature for mana, add an additional kind of green. And of course that matters for the sake of if you animate a land that's untapped, that's going to be tapping for 2. But generally where Badgermole is getting busted here is in standard, we have deck lists that are able to use Llanowar Elf being available in foundations in the standard set. Every single Badgermole Cub deck has Llanowar Elf in it, because when you go land Llanowar Elf on turn 2, you go Badgermole Cub, you then get that recycled for 1, because now you play that Badgermole Cub, you animate a land that's tapped, but that Llanowar Elf will then again tap for 2. Then you can play 2 mana worth of things, more things, and then on turn 3, if you play a land, you're on tapping with like 6+ mana, if nothing is interacted with, forcing your opponent to play, again, those mid-range strategies, the control strategies that are able to deal with the turn 2 menace. Gene Pollinator is another one that we got recently out of Edge of Eternities, and is, in addition, is a part of this. You have to tap an untap permanent for this, but we're going to see why this doesn't even matter. So really, in standard, Badgermole Cub is able to create these hyper ramp situations, allowing you to poop out your hand, create a massive board, and an overwhelming presence that your opponent generally isn't able to answer unless they have some type of Wrath of God effect or multiple removal spells. Specifically in the Simic aggro deck, Gene Pollinator, Llanowar Elf, and the Badgermole Cub. This deck, all 12 of those cards exist. Then you are going to be playing cards on the top end like the Jackal Genius Geneticist, that when you play on turn 2, right? Let's say you go turn 1 Llanowar Elf, turn 2 Jackal Genius Geneticist, then you play the Llanowar Elf to then make 2 copies of that. Turn after that, Jackal is a 2-power thing. You play Badgermole Cub, you create 2 copies of the Badgermole Cub. Thanks to the Geneticist, Jackal goes up to 3, and then you play Tyvar. You just go off from there. Insane, nutty, crazy starts happen with Simic aggro decks. And that is why things get really powerful, because especially with something like a Gene Pollinator, you play something like Innkeeper's Talent. Innkeeper's Talent at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on a target creature you control. Fantastic. That is a permanent that you can tap to the Gene Pollinator to be able to add more mana, right? Which is absolutely the insane part of it. So if you go turn 1, you know, kind of Llanowar Elf, turn 2 Badgermole Cub, you have 2 mana, you can then go the Innkeeper's Talent, and then play a Gene Pollinator maybe somewhere in there, and future down the line, the Innkeeper's Talent is a permanent, because a Gene Pollinator doesn't require you to tap a creature to use its ability. It's just another untapped permanent. You could use a creature that doesn't have haste, that just got cast out, you could use the Innkeeper's Talent, and you can grow it further using its other abilities, then giving your stuff ward that has counters on it, and doubling the amount of counters, whatever. You get to do some crazy things. And at the top end, you have Ouroboros. As you put more counters on things, your creatures that now your lands have 1/1 counters on them, they double up based on the amount of counters on Ouroboros. Absolutely insane stuff coming out of this deck. This deck is doing crazy things. Now, next up, I want to talk about Bant Combo. This is specifically with airbending. So really, your cornerstones of this strategy are going to be Aang Swift Savior, that says when Aang enters, airbend up to 1 other target creature or spell. What that happens with that is you exile it, and while it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 generic mana rather than its mana cost. You play that alongside Orlok, which says spells you cast from your graveyard or from exile cost 2 generic less to cast. Folks, that means any card you airbend costs 0. What then happens with the Aang is you might airbend something like an Appa Steadfast Guardian. Appa Steadfast Guardian allows, when it enters, airbend any number of target non-land permanents you control. And so what happens here is you create a loop where you're able to just like airbend everything. Great. What you then do is you airbend, hopefully at some point you have Aang at the crossroads. When Aang enters, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature card with mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest of the bottom of your library in any order. 4 or less means you can get Appa, 4 or less means you could get Aang. All this stuff to loop the Aang at the crossroads over and over again. You poop out your whole board with your Badgermole Cubs, Llanowar, the Bramble Family, all that stuff. You just make your massive board out. At some point, you're going to be able to find your Quantum Riddler, and you're going to be able to draw out your whole deck. And then you find, you know, whether it be the Natural Order or the Cradlehoof Behemoth, and you just go for the win there. That's essentially what it is. And this is off the back of Gene Pollinator, Llanowar Elf, and the Badgermole Cub. And so this is where the package of standard exists as a hyper aggressive angle, being able to hyper power the mana generation that exists in standard, but also as a way to create more creatures to be able to go off with these combos, as well as creating 1/1 counter synergies in the Simic aggro deck. So Badgermole Cub doing a lot in the standard format, but not necessarily a lot of variety. A lot of the same things are happening, and so we are consistent with what we want to do in standard. It is going to be ramping hard. When it comes to the Pioneer format, things are actually in a really interesting place. Orzhov Greasefang was arguably the best deck in the Pioneer format, and now Gruul Prowess, another aggro deck, has made its way up to the top. So if the top of the meta is aggressive, generally speaking, you want to just be faster than said deck. And so that's where a deck like Jeskai Ascendancy has actually made its way up there. So Badgermole Cub, in this case, the part that matters for it is the fact that when you Earthbend, you create a creature on your land that has a 1/1 counter on it. What does cards like Sylvan Awakening do? Well, it makes it so until your next turn, all your lands become 2/2 elemental creatures with reach, indestructible, haste. Okay, so Badgermole Cub is able to animate your lands, right? It's able to ramp out, create some 1/1 counters, cool. Sylvan Awakening is at sorcery speed able to animate all of your lands, giving them a bunch of abilities. How do these two mix together in a way that actually makes sense? Because Badgermole Cub only animates one land, right? Well, when you combine it with Jeskai Ascendancy, a absolutely insane nutty magic card that sees play over and over and over again in so many formats. Like when you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get a 1/1 counter on them. So imagine Badgermole Cub animates a land, puts a 1/1 counter on it, you were not able to put another 1/1 counter on it, untap those creatures. Now, every time a Badgermole Cub comes down and animates something, you're able to untap your lands and use them. They're going to double up on the amount of mana they tap for. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So you are now creating an engine where you are, generating positive mana every time you cast a non-creature spell. And you are able to, every time you cast a non-creature spell, draw through your deck, discard, and just go through and find the cards that you do not need. This leads to 4-color Ascendancy that backs around the idea of Badgermole Cub and Sylvan Caryatid. And really, with Boomerang Basics and cards like Storm Chaser's Challenge, you are going to be able to generate a crazy amount of mana. And then with stuff like Storm Chaser's Challenge, what's beautiful about this, yeah, you create some otters. The otters don't necessarily matter, but you can create a crazy amount of otters and then just like pass the turn and win with them next turn. But when this class becomes level 2, you may return an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So that's how you then, Boomerang Basics, play the Storm Chaser Stallion again, and then reset it. What that loop does is creates another chance for you to draw and discard through your deck if you so need to. Then what you do is you ultimately use Sylvan Awakening. You then go through your loop again with the Jeskai Ascendancy, put a bunch of 1/1 counters on things, and you just go off from there and you attack with the massive board. 4-color Ascendancy being a brand new to the scene deck in the Pioneer format is absolutely amazing. You love to see new archetypes kind of pop up. Ones that aren't necessarily like terribly broken, ones that really do get answered to removal hard, and ones that do have a lot of counterplay against a strategy, not necessarily broken, and that's what's great. The top of the metagame is actually full of removal. If the Rakdos midrange deck and Azorius Control are going to be at the top, there are answers to this deck that is trying to resolve a 3-mana multicolor enchantment, as well as work around a Badgermole Cub that is very easily fatal pushable and hit with any type of red-based removal spell. So again, these decks are very answerable, but one that takes advantage of the 1/1 counter untap synergy when it comes to the lands and is able to go off from there. Next up, when it comes to the modern format, there's been a deck that's been around in the lower end of modern for a while. It actually ebbed and flowed. It's been at the top, it's been at the bottom. It's one that's come around the Modern Horizons soup of things. And you could argue most of modern at this point is Modern Horizons soup, but it's one that hasn't seen value for a while, especially up against the Frog decks and the Solitude. There's been a lot of more powerful things to do, and that's specifically the Yawgmoth deck, having been breathed new life into with a lot of powerful synergies with Badgermole Cub. Now, Cub in this case, the power of Cub is being able to create a creature that has no downside to being sacked, quote unquote, while also being able to be proliferated. A lot of things come together just being able to create redundant copies of this. Why does this matter? Well, in Modern, you have Yawgmoth, Thran, Physician. The key to this is you can create infinite situations, but it's a very complicated, high skill toolbox creature strategy in the Modern format, and one that a lot of people are afraid to get into. And it's one that actually does a lot of things and is very rewarding if you understand the lines. But Yawgmoth, Thran, Physician has protection from other humans, and it says pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, and draw a card. Where this can start mattering with the Badgermole Cub is you can pay 1 life and sacrifice another creature. You can sacrifice the land that you animated with the Badgermole Cub. Then what happens is that land comes back tapped. You can then bring it untapped with something like a shock land. So it's almost like you tap that land for mana, you play the Yawgmoth, Thran, Physician, you're able to sacrifice it and then bring it back untapped to be able to use that mana again. You then put a -1/-1 counter on target creature and draw a card. So it's now able to start generating you some value while also returning a land. You can also play 2 black, discard a card, and proliferate. That allows you to increase the amount of 1/1 counters on something, or the amount of -1/-1 counters on a something if you were to put it on another creature, an opposing creature. You could then originally do this with something like Young Wolf, where you put the -1/-1 counter on it, and if it dies, you return it with the 1/1 counter on it. You could then put a -1/-1 counter back onto it and repeat loops. Well, Young Wolf is generally part of the loops of this deck to be able to deal a bunch of damage, but now Badgermole Cub hyperpowers that, but allowing you to get lands that are able to come in untapped, specifically if they are shock lands, right? So this is where the list comes about. You are playing 4 Badgermole Cub, you are playing the regulars of, like, you know, the 4 Yawgmoth, some amount of Grist, Malevolent Rumble to feed your graveyard and dig through. You have the Strangleroot Geist as the hasty card with Undying as well as the X one. So a lot of powerful parts about this deck are going to be able to take advantage of the infinite combo that already exists in this deck alongside Agatha's Soul Cauldron, feeding 1/1 counters and everything. Imagine now your Badgermole Cub lands that have 1/1 counters on them with an Agatha's Soul Cauldron putting a Grist onto them. Now your Badgermole Cub lands, your Earthbanded lands, become Grist the Hunger Tides. Even more powerful. We were already doing this with other cards in this deck. Now, Delighted Halfling is also able to generate more mana off of the kind of Badgermole Cub synergy there. Now, the second green that you develop from the Badgermole Cub doesn't grant your legendary creatures uncounterable. All it does is add an additional green. So keep that in mind. The Delighted Halfling adds 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered. So you can use that black to cast a Yawgmoth, but the green you produce can cast a Yawgmoth. But if you split that green into something else, it's not going to like necessarily make that uncounterable. If you split that into like a Grist, that Grist will not be uncounterable as a legendary card. And so there's a lot of things working in this deck, in these creature toolbox synergies. A lot of things coming together that Badgermole Cub is able to hyperpower. And so we're starting to see the different angles that as you get older into formats, Badgermole Cub is able to hyperpower in that sense. We also next up have the format of Legacy, and I don't know why I didn't like kind of duplicate this. So let me just back up here. I was kind of looking for the deck search here. If I kind of pop back into the Legacy format live, I want to give full transparency on this. When it comes to Badgermole Cub in Legacy, I have a general understanding, a concept of what Badgermole Cub is doing, but I will not say that I can fully speak to all of its synergies. The type of Legacy decks that I play and the type of Legacy I am used to is not aligned with Badgermole Cub, and so I cannot speak to its full synergy. For those of you that are watching this video and are this far and are a Legacy player, if you can speak to Cradle Control and how Badgermole Cub is working in it, I'd be very welcome to hear your thoughts, but I will do my best to provide a baseline level 1 surface level review of what is going on with Badgermole Cub in, in kind of Legacy as I kind of see it and understand it. Now, Legacy is a whole different beast like post-ban. Things have changed. We see Dimir Tempo at the top, but also Is It Delver being the aggressive blue-based tempo strategy. Oops All Spells, Mystic Forge, also combo decks at the top that are pushing some of these other decks away. Eldrazi Aggro is a video that I want to make kind of later this week, is also up there alongside a Omnitel strategy. The Legacy format has actually changed. It is not just the degenerate blue-black mid-range soup. It's actually a highly interactive, highly aggressive, is it Delver strategy alongside combo. There's even budget options, like Blue Cloudpost does have budget versions of it. Eldrazi also does have versions that are a lot more budget and a lot more affordable, and Mystic Forge combo obviously not being that, but Oops All Spell being the other combo deck in the format can be as low as $400 to $500 to be able to get into and play top tier high level Legacy. And so the Legacy format where Badgermole Cub comes in and fits into all of this is a creature based toolbox synergy similar to that of the Yawgmoth deck. Now we see this kind of repeating, a creature based toolbox deck that ends up in a combo. We see that kind of come about in Standard in two different ways. It's just the decks don't really match up. We see the beginnings of that in Pioneer, and as the formats get older with Modern, especially with Legacy, we see that in Cradle Control. So Cradle Control is taking advantage of Gaia's Cradle, hence the name of it. And so Gaia's Cradle being able to tap, add green mana for all the creatures that you control, you are a deck looking to generate a high level of mana, but also take advantage of White of the Reliquary. White of the Reliquary gets 1/1 for each creature you have in your graveyard. It's a 2 mana 2/2. Otherwise, with Vigilance, you can sacrifice another creature, tap it, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. The key to this at level 1 is the fact that you have Badgermole Cub that can generate a land, right? That can turn a land into a creature. You can then tap the white to be able to sack that creature, that's a land, look for another land. You are now not going down on lands to be able to get that. The level 2 of this again is with, if you were to play with potential shock lands, what this deck is not doing, you could bring that in potentially untapped. Now, this deck isn't necessarily doing that, but there are things that you can do with things like Wasteland. So Wasteland as another synergy is going to be a card where you play, you can destroy a non-basic land. If you were to animate that with the Badgermole Cub, you could Wasteland your opponent's non-basic, and now the Wasteland comes back tapped, and you are not down on lands whatsoever, not down on tempo really at all. The Earthbended Wasteland is now back to be able to continue to ruin your opponent's non-basic life. Past that, you have some really cute things like Sylvan Safekeeper, where if you are able to like Badgermole Cub multiple things, then Sylvan Safekeeper is then going to be able to sack lands to give target creature Shroud. If you sack a land that is animated, it's just going to come back tapped and be able to continue to go off from there. Grist the Hunger Tide is also in here to take advantage of the creatures in graveyard synergies. And then White of the Reliquary can then grab like, you know, a one of Atraxa and all that stuff. So there might be some things that I'm generally missing here. I mean, you have Noble Hierarchs and Ignoble Hierarchs that are able to generate more mana off the Badgermole Cub. So we see that similar angle to that of Standard, where we have a lot of kind of 1 mana creatures alongside like a Birds of Paradise that are able to generate mana alongside the Dryad Arbor. So you have like a full package of creatures that are able to tap for mana that double up thanks to the Badgermole Cub. Similar to that of Standard, we have some creature toolbox angles that we see in like Modern, and some combo aspects as well. Maybe not like infinite necessarily, but again, I don't want to speak to it fully. Just want to repeat that full transparency. I have not a lot of, if at all, experience with decks like Cradle Control. So I'd really hope someone in my comment section can maybe better speak to it. But I do want to bring it up for the fact that I have been told of and wanted to research some of the Badgermole Cub synergies that exist in Legacy. And this is where primarily I'm hearing talks of. Now that's where Badgermole Cub is in all of Magic the Gathering. We know that, yes, the Earthbend mechanic is really powerful in Commander. A lot of people are maybe complaining or happy about it. It's a powerful land reanimation tool that has the kind of assurance, the insurance, I should say, against exile and destruction, mass land destruction, single target. And so it's a great way to protect your utility lands, glacial chasms, and all that stuff in Commander. So we know that it has benefits there, and in singleton formats as well, alongside Canadian Highlander, but also in the 1v1 60 card formats, Badgermole Cub is having a widespread effect, a powerful effect, and in many formats it may not be, as I mentioned, broken necessarily where it may get banned, but it is not only reinvigorating current archetypes, but also breathing life into whole new ones, if not breaking parts of Standard. We have yet to see where things will go. I know I've been doing the clickbait thing on certain one of my videos where I've been calling Badgermole Cub broken, and honestly, I'm going to continue to do that as a content creator because that's what get the clicks. But if you watch the video, then you understand my opinion of like, yeah, the card is powerful, but I would also like to wait to see a tournament happen or a couple to really get a good feel for what Badgermole Cub is doing. I will be continuing to play it, especially in Standard, while also hopefully playing against it and testing around maybe a little bit in the older formats. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. how you're feeling about Badgermole Cub and how you feel this card is going to have a long-term impact on these formats or potentially have a short-term impact by potentially getting banned.